Hello, everyone. I had that after lunch moment of thinking, oh gosh, is everyone going to be full bellies and falling asleep? So I'm going to do my best to keep it lively and give you enough data points to keep us all paying attention. So at Akerna, we are visionaries. We innovate to meet the needs of technology and compliance, not only for today, but for 5, 10, 15 years in the future. And some of you may know the name MJ Freeway. On June 17th, MJ Freeway and MTech completed a SPAC merger transaction to list publicly on the NASDAQ as Akerna under the ticker KERN. So as the first cannabis technology company to list on a major US exchange, we are making a big play to knit together all of the data points across the cannabis supply chain and in the world's fastest growing industry. So you're all here, you probably all already know that cannabis is expected to crest $31 billion in sales by the year 2027. It is already, as an industry, bigger than craft beer, bigger than chocolates, bigger than tomatoes. What you probably didn't know is that at Akerna, we've built arguably the world's most transparent and visible supply chain, certainly more than any other product you put on or in your body. So I have here a gummy. This one is from our fine Detroit airport, so it's non-medicated. However, if it were medicated, I would be able to tell you the farm on which the cannabis plants were grown. I would be able to tell you any additives that were applied during the growing process. I would be able to tell you when those plants were harvested, on what day, at what location. I would be able to tell you when they were distributed to a processing facility and that cannabis plant matter was extracted into the cannabis extract or oil, which was then infused into a batch of gummies. I could tell you when that batch was distributed to which retail locations and when that product was sold, on what day, at what location, at what time, to which specific patient, if it's a medical patient, or the consumer profile for a consumer. So this level of visibility and transparency in the supply chain is thanks to data collected at every step along the way, and is uniquely a feature of Akerna's MJ platform, the most robust cannabis data collection platform. To date, we've tracked more than $15 billion in cannabis sales transactions. This data has the power to do great good for science and medicine, for food and agriculture, for communities and taxes, for government's ability to govern. Do you guys remember last fall, just late 2018, early 2019, when we couldn't eat romaine lettuce? There was the big romaine lettuce scare. And it took the FDA weeks to narrow down the source of that contamination, and then not with 100% accuracy. If it was cannabis, we would know. We know the source of the cannabis in this gummy and every hand it touched along the way. And not the batch of gummies, this specific one. And this data is useful for so much more than just recalls. It's data that tells us which of the over 400 plus chemical compounds work best for what purpose, from restful sleep to opioid addiction. I'm going to put this gummy down over here. Remind me to retrieve it later. To cancer treatment. It's data that predicts what we can expect in the industry this year and 5 years in the future. Not just for production capacity, but also for patient and consumer demand. This rich data supply chain can make us smarter and better at mapping out the landscape for responsible federal legalization. So how did the cannabis industry, a nascent industry with a federally illegal status, become the most transparent and accountable, data-rich supply chain globally? It started with us, Akerna. As MJ Freeway, we invented the concept of seed-to-sale tracking, this concept of tracking something through its growth cycle all the way through to the final sale to a specific patient or consumer. And it started with what we call the 3 Ps. Public safety, this idea of prevention of diversion. Product safety, knowing what's happening in that supply chain at every step along the way. And patient or consumer safety, the labeling and the testing and knowing that with good confidence that you know what you're getting in a product. We knew that keeping track of cannabis inventory down to the gram level, including waste, would be important to the sustainability but also to the growth of this industry. And we determined quickly that we needed to have a cannabis-specific solution. There are other pieces of software that serve other regulated industries that have pieces that work. So for instance, in pharma does a pretty good job of tracking the final sale of a product to a final patient. However, they don't track their raw materials or where those come from in any discernible way. Alcohol and tobacco do a pretty good job of prevention of diversion and collection of taxes. And food and agriculture does a pretty good job of labeling. But there was nothing that did all of those things. So cannabis really needed a hybrid model. It needed software built specifically for the industry. So the algorithms that we invented for cannabis, as our technology was invented for cannabis, it wasn't adapted from other industries, takes into account the moisture that evaporates from the product when it dries. And it equivalizes those grams as they change form into oil and continues to track those exact grams until they're sold. We went from serving a handful of clients in Colorado to having the largest global cannabis footprint currently, with government contracts in 3 states and clients in 14 countries. We have collected more than 2 terabytes of data across the supply chain, from cultivation to manufacturing to retail. And again, perhaps surprisingly, it's the cannabis industry that's leading, not the other way around. We're not adapting from other industries. We are setting the standard for public and product safety through supply chain transparency and visibility. So take the gummy. Safety and precision in a situation like that means that you can execute a recall faster and with much more precise granularity. But the power of the data goes well beyond just faster and more effective recalls. Our operator clients can use this data to determine what strains to grow based on their efficacy with patients and consumers, and also which ones are economically better. We have a particular case study we did with a client where they were growing 2 strains. One sold for 10% more than the other. However, using our data and reporting, they were able to learn that it actually cost them 50% more to produce. So the strain that was seemingly the better seller was actually not delivering them the best ROI. Our government clients can leverage their enforcement resources in a more targeted way to narrow in on anomalies. So for instance, if an operator generally has a strain in specific conditions that experiences 80% moisture loss post-harvest, and that operator reports 90%, that's an anomaly that the government might want to check and see what the valid reason is for that event. And it's rich economic data. States can assess historic data. We have 10 years worth to track patient demand, market growth, and taxes collected. Here's a great number, and this is very interesting, I think, for anyone who's tracking the cannabis industry. We know that new consumers and/or patients are entering the market at a growth rate of 9% a month. And some of them are new. I mean, presumably many are also coming from the illicit market where they can purchase product much more safely. This new consumer data tells us what businesses and states can anticipate in terms of their expected growth and their market's active consumers. And this growth is not limited domestically. Because of our global footprint, we're collecting enough economic data about the cannabis supply chain outside the US to know that countries like Canada, Colombia, and Italy, a new but aggressive entrant into the cannabis market, they're taking advantage of the US federal-state conflict and positioning themselves to be the global leader in cannabis export. A transparent supply chain from seed to sale, not just to shelf, like many other industries, gives the cannabis industry an unprecedented view into the data of what is purchased. So, for instance, this is also interesting, women over the age of 55 are the fastest growing category of cannabis consumer. Also, older consumers are purchasing more than 29% of medical product now. So if you're not focusing on these categories, it's important to consider them and to think about focusing on them. Also, our data tells us that in states that pass adult use, like Michigan, what we see over time is that the medical market does not go away, it does not decline. The medical market actually continues in a symbiotic relationship with recreational post-passage of adult use. So we see continued growth in the medical market and continued demand for cannabis as a medicine even after it's legalized for adult use in specific markets. So what are patients buying? How will the market grow? Our data tells us that concentrates, or cannabis oil, has now reached parity with flower. And if the trend continues, that will overtake flower in the next couple years. This trend could change how a state thinks about their licensing tiers and types. It could change how you, perhaps as operators, think about production capacity, what you need and where. And it's powerful data to peel back years of mystery and mystique about strains and effects. This data tells us, with 10 years of history in medical states, which strains patients have chosen for which illnesses. Patients have been healing themselves for years, and we can see with what strains and by what consumption methods. This data is critical for better decision making for patients, for businesses, for governments. And it's data that's going to help us design a better industry going forward that drives more transparency and visibility for that public product and patient safety. It's also data that has application well outside of the cannabis industry. I would love to know what has been applied in the growing process to many things that I'm consuming or putting on or in my body. I've had the opportunity to consult for many other industries and have had other industries contact us about potentially repurposing this supply chain tracking to them. So I think we need to think about cannabis as this nascent emerging industry as leading. The inventions that we're developing for cannabis will be repurposed into other industries rather than us only drawing from other industries into our industry. And with that, I will thank you for your time, and if there's a moment for questions, I'll take any questions.